Well, hello and good morning. It is Friday. How are you? Morning. It is Friday. Friday. Yay! Uh, yeah. Mm. Hey, my precision and safeguard. That's awesome. Yeah. 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 Well, it has been wonderful. Um, lots of new things. We oh gosh. So yeah, I'm gearing up for the IAFE North Georgia University um, presentation. I have Yeah, I am going to submit a proposal to the IAFE Europe uh, conference. So hopefully I'll get kind of chosen for that. So, gear up for travel. What is that in December of this year to London? Hopefully they'll clean London up quite a bit. Or is it September? Yeah, either one. Um, um, but gearing up for the Carolinas Criminal uh, Intel Analyst Conference in North Carolina, coming up in, I think theirs is in June. I've got the National Student Affairs, um, their national conference coming up in March. Um, so this is this week, because it's the end of the first month of the year, is like really gearing up for what I've got coming up in the rest of the year. um, you almost feel like, okay, did you bite off more than you can chew? Because I also have ACJS conference, and I can't remember what month that is. Uh, Coming up, that a majority of all these I've already have accepted proposals, and of course gearing up presentations. So IAFE, the CCAA in Carolinas, um, yeah, and then I'll do the other IAFE as well. I'll put in for, of course, um, the Foundation for Critical Thinking actually just put out a call for proposals for their 46th annual international conference, and I look forward to really putting together a presentation for that as well. Um, but they've also opened up their certification. Um, you know, I I don't look at myself as like the expert or anything like that on critical thinking. I don't think I've cornered that market, and I there will never be humbled enough, but by what I learn every day. I'm like, wow. I just my office is a mess with books. I mean, I've been getting really into, and my Substack took off over the last month. I think I started out with 97 people or 87 people at the beginning of subscribers at the beginning of December, and it blew up to like 120. So I was like, wow. And yeah, LinkedIn, I kind of post what I've been writing and such. So yeah, overnight I gained two more, which is awesome. But that also means like, okay, I obviously I have to keep pushing that edge of what it is, that we talk about here on Fridays and Mondays, and great ideas. And so, um, but I had an interesting conversation the other day, Wednesday, um, with a former colleague about kind of what we've been saying about the Intel, and they're like, well, you're actually now becoming. They gave their honest opinion, which I totally want people's honest opinions of intelligence analysts. That, well, you're blanketing everybody, and you're really kind of almost being offensive and insulting, saying that Intel analysts don't, they don't know how to think. And this is somebody who spent, I want to say, quite a number of years as a naval intelligence officer, as well as within some of the three-letter agencies. Um, and I said, well, I I guess I do. I said, I want to insult, because I could even say myself, why do you think I'm writing this stuff? I'm learning it, and I wish I would have learned it 30 years ago. Um, yeah, yeah. Like, the common person tries to say they're smart. Um, and I'm like, no, you're dumb. I include you, meaning me, in that conversation. When I say you, I'm not saying that, oh, well, I'm a doctor. No, that has nothing to do with it. That's just a label, you know. um, to me, I'm like, yeah, we don't know how to think. And I said, okay, quick test. Um, I said, we talked about it on Monday. You and I did. And I said, what is it that, when you're faced with a priority intelligence requirement, or a detective, if you're a crime analyst, a detective comes up to you and says, hey, I've been putting together these patterns that we've obviously been seeing. Here's a problem. Do you know how to put together the argument? And they were like, well, yeah, who's doing this pattern, or what is, the question of the priority. Every priority intelligence requirement pretty much is a question that needs to be answered. And I was just like, no, see, you're not putting together the argument. What's the premise? And there was long pauses, and I said, okay, you and we're supposed to be the smartest people in the room. That's what decision makers think, and that's what general um, individuals, when they hear intelligence officers or intelligence analysts, they expect that we are the best of the best, the cream of the crop thinkers. They see the movies, there's tons of Hollywood movies for decades about intelligence analysts. It doesn't help that you have the Jack Ryans, which or 24, if you remember Jack from 24. That here we can solve these problems all within a half hour or within a season. Or what was it, Criminal Minds, where the young lady, the blonde, is on the headset. She's like, hold on, I'm tracking the car right now. And they solve the case in 30, 45 minutes. Um, I said, unfortunately, that's not intelligence. That's not analysis. And it sure as heck is not critical thinking. I am always, it is, but you go back to, and I love the small scene in what Clear and Present Danger with Harrison Ford when he's sitting. Is it Clear and Present Danger, or was it the first? Yeah, Clear and Present Danger. When he sits in the cubicle with the other analysts and they're just all huddled together, and it's a slow scene, it's a slow burn, and you could see the look of intensity on his face. I'm like, that's what we do. It's we have to stew about the what, the why, go back to this, let's look at that. Why are we not looking at this? And I'm going, why are you not asking questions? Why are you not looking at, and like I said, I'm like, I continue to today, like, I have so many things, these bookmarks. Those are things that I have to recall back to myself. These are not things for, oh, that's a good idea for me to write on. No, as I'm learning, I'm going, I didn't think about, not only the deductive reasoning has nothing to do with just argumentation. It's about the wording that we use. It's um and I did, when I wrote the week before and then released it last week or even earlier this week about Dower's critical thing introduction to critical thinking. I'm like, I finished the book. I mean, gosh, it's 500 and something pages. Yeah, 550 pages long. And there are things in there that I have never seen in any of my other critical thinking books. There is nothing. Um, yes. Yeah. 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 I missed both proposals for ILEA and IACA. And I would have to say those are probably two of the primary crime analyst places. Okay. Well, yes, they are on the planet. Um, but that by the time that they came up, everybody else had kind of fallen into place. Um, yeah, because at the end of last year was really crazy busy with how many, um, you know, uh, but going back to your point, like, yes, I'm not seeing some of this stuff in books, except for, yeah, this book, it was printed by published by Barnes and Noble in 1998. Now, he's only published a couple of books on critical thinking and reasoning. And I'm like, okay, but why are we not teaching this in the academies, in the universities? And then that's why I wrote the other article, almost like it was a three-part article in a way. Um, the tradecraft malpractice that came out last night. I finally published that, yeah, at like 9 o'clock last night. Um, the keeping students, losing thinkers, and then the tradecraft without thinking. Because that was part of the other conversation is we were talking about misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, which of course you and I were already talking about Monday. And I really looked at asking that question. I said, I said, let's see your hands. So no cheating on the keyboard. I said, what is the definition, the intelligence definition of misinformation? Crickets. And I said, just give me buzzwords of what, and they stumbled through. We did the same thing for disinformation. Then when we got to propaganda, that was easy. Well, it's, either state or non-state actors, mostly state actors that, want to push their agenda in a way to change or, coerce another society's viewpoints, which I'm like, that's great, because we see that propaganda now every day in our news media, especially with the events going on in Minneapolis. Um, that's been really blown open of, that these are paid agitators, these are part of the complete socialist, communist, and even they're bringing in the word Marxist, um, which we hadn't seen Marxist propaganda on Antifa and anti, Trump, anti-right um, protests, if you will, riots, until this month, until January. We started to see the Marxist, which does, okay, well, yeah, precursor, but to me, Marxism was kind of that segue into the communist. But then I go, wow, this generation is just so stupid to want Marxism, socialism, communism. You look at the mayor now of New York who called Adams, his capitalist, saying that, well, you can't, something with about the $12 billion, like, don't, you're going to go into a deficit. And, he kept putting this whole thing of, well, we're going to have free buses and free this, free childcare. And then all of a sudden the other day it was, so if we don't do something about it, we're going to be in a $12 billion deficit. You're like, yeah, because your socialist tactics don't work. But people don't think, they don't want to do history. Um, and, and I'm just like, I think you said it. I feel too, I'm just barely scratching the surface. Um, and it really is kind of, I'm hoping that this year, with all the speaking engagements and going more live, like with this stuff and recording it and then getting it out there, that we at least get the Intel community, um, because talking to others still in the community, I'm like, I just kind of ask those questions of, so what critical thinking book do you have on your, oh, I have the toolkit, the thinker's toolkit. I'm like, that's just those are just little snippets about stuff. What do you do to further that, to really go understand? And I say, well, yeah, I have the analytical edge, which the introduction class is just that. We kind of start to touch on stuff. But then that's why I think that this year's, that's going to be my focus, is I want to be that thorn and say, prove me, yeah, the table that says, prove me wrong. Um, you know, yeah, I, um, mhm. Hmm. Yeah. 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 That's what I want to do. That kind of was the epiphany. Yeah. And that's exactly what really hit me, 2 or 3 weeks ago, was why am I just writing on kind of coming up with a problem, like, or expressing, some of the metacognitive abilities, like, okay, this is how you can improve your intelligence. This is your own, and I'm talking IQ intelligence. Um, and then, yeah, over the last 3 4 weeks of really, I think having this on the twice a week in the mornings has really, and then it's opened the door. I've had a lot more people reach out to me through my social media, because of the stuff that I started to post, like I said, just a couple of weeks ago. Um, and especially this last week of, well, you're calling out agencies and you're calling out universities. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've taught for 12 different universities in the last 18 years. And every one of them has always been worried about offending a student. What happened to where we as academics, as scholars, should be able to call out an individual student, and I don't, even an intelligence practitioner who is getting a degree, whether it's an undergrad or an advanced degree, like a master's, or even going for a doctorate, to say your essay, your research paper is crap. You you pick a topic based off of the prompt. You don't know how to put together a simple problem, like really be able to articulate the problem, support it with sources. Who else is saying it's a problem? But furthermore, who else is saying that it's not a problem? Do we not do that in intelligence analysis? Like, whether, I don't care if it's crime analysis, just because there's a whole bunch of car break-ins in a neighborhood, does that mean that we have a gang problem? Oh, it's an organized criminal element. Are you sure? Maybe it's just teenagers who are, on, mid break, they're bored, and one of them got brazen enough to start breaking into two or three neighbors' cars. Um, is that an organized criminal element? Eh, I know, it's, but to have these individuals who say, well, I'm a, deputy chief of police out of this town, and they're in my criminal justice class, or they're getting an intelligence degree. And again, I mean, I put myself in that when I went and got my undergrad and my grad intel, degrees from American Military University, and it's not knocking the university itself. I think it's a larger program, that we have, and we talked about it, last week and this week, of the curriculum is more towards, okay, well, it's all historics, but rather than giving the and supporting the faculty that go, it's crap. Where's your argument? Where's your purpose? Do you even have a position? I don't see one. That you have I have master's degree students and doctoral students who don't even know how to put together a thesis statement, a clearly defined thesis statement. And in the end, they just conclude by they think wrapping up. And I'm like, well, what happens if you had to do an intelligence assessment? I mean, if we still look at what the FBI does, which is the five pillars, they have the five, assessment, study, bulletin, um, intel report. So when you look at those, yeah, they have different formats, but is critical thinking applied? And I got to throw out, you can't say SATs, structured analytic techniques, are not. I'm now to that point where I'm like so anti SATs because it's a check in the box. I mean, do we really ACH? How are you going to show that? You probably end up writing more for an ACH than you would the report itself. How did you come to the conclusion? Some of it is informal, but how do we get away from these scandals? Um, and I mean both sides. I hear people, and we can get into the politics. Obama spied on Trump. Biden wasn't in charge. Trump has his retribution and he's doing it subtly, but nonetheless, he's doing it. Um, and I'm not meaning that anti-Trump and pro-Trump either. It's just I can put myself in the middle and look because I'm trying to, as I read, um, how much more does it take for even myself to go, huh? I see where or anti-right, anti-Trump people are coming from, not in the emotional sense, um, but argumentation. Like, okay, but I can also see it from the conspiracy theorist of we're being played. Where does the intel, the intel analysis? Yeah, 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 yep. Yeah, mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, yeah, Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah. 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 And I think even, I look back at going through the interview process with the agencies. And I know that, like, say with the Bureau, when I went through the interview process, it was a panel of, a couple of SIAs, senior Intel analysts who were, it was remote. So it was over the phone. They shot me questions. Um, and I kind of almost look at it as, the questions that they usually ask um, were almost popularity questions. Like, what do you think if you have to face, tell us a time that you faced a difficult conflict with a coworker? And you're like, what the heck does that have to do with anything intelligence? I could be a complete jerk and be one of the best and brightest. And but because maybe I said what you want to hear, but then I get into that office, does then you got 100% of a great analyst, or I said exactly what you want, but I'm a horrible analyst. And I could say when I went into the Bureau, after already being an Intel analyst with um, military, private sector, public sector, and everything contractor, civilian, I still wasn't a good analyst. I mean, I remember the first time that I was told, go write this, go write by my SIA. I was new to a squad and they needed me to write something. And it was horrible because, one, I didn't know what it is that they really wanted. I didn't know to ask all these questions. It was, here's your prompt. And I felt like I was back in school, and I wrote what I felt like I was back in school and not an intelligence product. And when I handed it in, they called me into their office and just jaw dropped. What the heck did you just turn in? And I'm going, yeah, I've been in for 20, almost 20 years. That was 2010. I'd been in since 1990. And they were like, no, what the, and I mean, petrified. And then, of course, my heart sank, like, what the heck was I thinking? Um, and yeah, that was mostly on me. But then, that was part of the reason I ended up going back to getting my master's was, how do I do this? But then, yeah, at the end of my master's, I think I got a good education, but going into the academies, going into the higher ed, it's not, except for just a couple of classes, like through the intelligence community advanced analyst program, the ICAP. Yeah, there are classes you can take on better critical thinking, and they'll go over Mind Valley, but they don't. I just think that we never go far enough. That if you're going to have an academy that's going to be an intelligence analyst, and the analyst can go through, and now the FBI, so I'm coming full circle with that. The FBI, like 10 years ago, changed its way that it interviews agent and analysts. And so done in the phases. And they have a writing assessment. They ask you about your problem solving skills. But after reading from books written in the 1940s, what you would say are agents, former agents of the FBI, about how they used to do their hiring, there was reasons, and you and I talked about this on Monday, that they looked at Harvard, they looked at Yale, they looked at Princeton, first and foremost, to recruit. They wanted those real thinkers, the ones that seem to like buck the system of professors by asking what we would say are abstract questions. That, oh, that this just isn't a student want to make a name for themselves. That's the way they're thinking. That do we ask those questions? I mean, I know the washout rates are high, mostly in the agent classes, the analyst classes. When I was a counselor in 2015 at the FBI Academy, our washout rate was only like 10% or less. You had 40 Intel analysts, and you would lose somewhere around two. um, and that's because, of course, taking the tests, if you failed two tests on two different modules, the third failure, you were just automatically out. If you failed a test, took the retest, and failed, you didn't get a third chance. So your two failures, that was out. But they never really taught, except for a couple of classes. Dr. Jan Goldman was part of not only the academy, but the ICAP program for the community, and taught his ethics of spying, which to me was a more critical thinking class, because you had to think about, yeah, the philosophy. And that's what, like, Rob. Yep. Yeah. The ethics of spying, and the companion book. And I really wish that he would update it, because we've changed so much. I think our society, so our philosophy, unfortunately, has changed. But I just think that being the hard hitting, you don't know anything. You have to start from the bottom as an Intel analyst, that unless you're going to hire the best and the brightest, and believe me, I wouldn't make the cut, or I wouldn't have made the cut of my own thoughts, with that I put in there about recommendations and implications, of saying that unless you ask these critical thinking questions, unless you have already a degree in critical thinking, like, why don't we have a degree in critical thinking? It's like we have degrees, PhDs in philosophy, but why do we not have? I mean, you have the Foundation for Critical Thinking, and they have their education standpoint. It's expensive, so I can't afford it on my own unless a company or an agency were to pick it up. But the information is just, it's, well, to me, it's not information. It's you know, and here, like I said, I found their original book, um, you know, Paul and Elder's original book, at a half price books. And the other thing that I meant to mention the other week is, I could tell this book really had never been opened because you could still hear the cracks when you open the spine. And it's the pages are pristine. There's no dog eared. Not until I got a hold of it, that I've been messing with pages it. And I had bought their Roman and Little complete set of critical thinking books, and I've used all those as references as mini manuals. And again, I think that I'm just constantly reminded of what I don't know. And that was part of the reason of starting the Analytic Edge Academy. I don't think it'll ever blow up, but it's the next class that I just released last week was about how to become an intellectual. And I did have a question from somebody who was interested in joining the Edge Academy and was, but wanted to know about the courses and the forthcoming courses. And I was like, they said they actually asked, well, what does intellectual have anything to do with critical thinking? And I had just completely outlined a whole chapter out of the Elder and Paul and Elder's book that they go into deep, talking even more than I do in the intellectual class about clarity and fairness and objectivity. Well, doesn't that have everything to do with critical thinking? That an intellectual isn't somebody who just sits in a suit jacket with a cigar and a scotch and wants to talk over people. To me, that's no, no. This is Francis Wantabi Dower, Dauer, and this is a that his book, huh? You can no Barnes and Noble. They'll probably have it on print on demand, because it's their book. They probably have it on a yeah, probably a, soft cover, not a hard cover, but you never know. Um, but yeah, that's the reason I love going book hunting. I go to antique shops or uh, other kind of like used bookstores. But in his books, and this is where I'm just floored that again, reading, picking up a book that says Introduction to Critical Thinking is different than any other. If I were to pick up their book, Elder and Paul, and then I got tons of other critical thinking books. I even have, my book, and even my book, I would say, is amateurish, not degrading it, but it's a foundational book. Mm, yeah. Hmm. Oh, Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and you can always let her know I too, former, I was military attached to DIA, both as a reservist, as an activated. I was a contractor as well on several contracts throughout DIA, and then of course, yeah, went to from the 1990s. I mean, I I just started going. Well, we all have it, right? We have our "I Love Me" book, so it's all the all the certificates, and I've always kept all of them to include those that we did on, oh gosh, way back then at DIA. You could go on to through JWix or even through Cypernet, and you could do their mini classes online. They were like one of the first that you could do these online classes, um, and going through a lot of them, because I have been convinced by several other people to go for my certified law enforcement analyst exam. But you can't just turn in a CV. You have to turn in certificates that show that you, or curriculum that you taught, or that you were already, like, where when you became an analyst and for how long, and government service or whatever. And I'm like going through paper after paper, and I did find 1993, 1994 certificates from DIA, from when it back then it was the Defense Intelligence College, or JMITSI, sorry, the Joint Military Intelligence Training Center, which takes it all the way back to the 90s. But um, and seeing the evolution. So yeah, and going through those, I would say out of 100 certificates, maybe one had anything to do with analysis. Like, it was a lot. I could go back and go, well, that was more talking about history, talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the intelligence failure. And you're just like, but that didn't really get into the analysis, even post 9/11, that the took a class on post 9/11, even post Boston bombing. I remember going through even in 2018, 19, one of the agents from the Boston bombing, when I was the school safety officer for Department of Education of Nevada, they came out and did a post investigation from his point of view as being a special agent on that task force, the Boston bombing, and we got a certificate for that. But at no time was there anything about the intelligence analysis. It was like it was just good old detective work, and coming from having been in the bureau during that time, like, no, it was all about intelligence. It had to be, because they didn't know everything. So, yeah. Yeah, Patriots Day. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yep. 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 I was so end of 2024 is when they came out saying no longer will we allow academics to take it on this date. I was mine were was had expired in August of 2024, and I renewed it, and like 2 months later that directive came out saying that they were no longer going, so mine's going to expire here very very soon. I literally came right under that last wire, um, to have the designation from the program, the PMO. I hope that at some point funding does come back in to allow academics. Um, I just don't see. This is where I would say is almost. I feel like it's a money waster for the Department of Defense to have said that GS 12s, 13s need this designation, but we go through LinkedIn and we see all these people who are intelligence officers, intelligence analysts within the military, civilian as well as active reserve, and I barely see anybody with the IFPC, and they were supposed to be using that designation as a way to, yeah, gauge. And you and I the since it came into inception in 2018, 2019, and I took the first one. I did the same thing. I drove up to Reno and went to Pearson View and took it. I didn't study, and I still, my raw score was passing. It wasn't stellar, but who cares? They don't post your, like, oh, your raw score was 732 and you needed 720 to pass. You got your designation. Um, yeah, even though they had the candidate handbook, um, and all the, because I'm like, well, collection management, that was a big part of it, and what's this, who's in charge of that? To me, that was, I could do without it. It doesn't. I'm not trying to degrade or offend anybody who has a designation. It just, to me, was okay. Here's another challenge as an intelligence, we are intelligence analysts forever, and but I'm true to that as well, of, well, if there's a designation, why not try for it? If I don't get it, I don't get it. I know I've been doing this for 30 years. I know I teach it. So I didn't pass it, and then, yeah, that was, somebody had asked, last year I had taken the test for the leaf, and through IACA, and they're like, "Why did you just do that?" And I'm like, "Well, one, it was, you filled out the application, you sent in some documentation, and then they said, great, you can do this, and you check in the box, you can take the online proctored exam." I took the proctored exam online, and I passed. Well, actually, I failed the first time. I failed the first time. I will say that, because I think I put way too much information. I was too analytic about the essay questions that they had. Uh, yeah, even though I have the books, I bought the books years ago. The study material for the law enforcement certification, not just Leaf, but I was just like, Marilyn Peterson's book, and then the newest one that came out. I'm looking at my bookshelf, going, "Yep, there they are." Um, I didn't pass, and when I asked, they said, well, they don't go back through. You can retake it. And I said, okay, I'll retake it. And this time I came with a different perspective, not new information. Um, but I just was like, okay, I'm not going to make it as long as a diatribe. Part of my feeling was, did I talk over the person who was looking at it? That could be my ego, right? That, well, they don't know. I know what I wrote was really probably overkill for the answer, but it was still, but then I got to think as a professor, if I had a student who overthought the question, I would have to fail them too. So I'm like, okay. So the second time around, yeah. And then, yeah, and talking to others within IACA, because I volunteer for their curriculum. I'm on another um, volunteer group for leadership, and so I get to take classes and I get to do things within the organization, and I love it because I take some of the webinars and I do the online training, and I love it because it keeps me engaged. And they were like, why don't you go for that? And I'm like, okay, I will. And yeah, I tried to put in for it, and now I've got to get all this documentation. I'm like, man, it's the documentation that's tedious. uh, Yeah, and that's, yeah, I have a whole drawer full of the "I love me" stuff, and I'm like, a lot of stuff I wish I would have kept. But again, it goes back to the whole thing of, I will always be humbled by what I definitely learn day after day of what I don't know. Um, either through and I would love for IFPC to come back to academics. I wish there was maybe even a pay, for it in a way. Um, that if you, Mhm. Yeah, but that's already Locke Johnson, and that's already Lowenthal and Clark. Well, I thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm always, yeah, if there's ever a time that you or anybody else ever wants to co-author a paper, go into a research or do a presentation, or want to do a co, you know, proposal, I'm always up for those. I find fun in those because, again, I look at it as everything. If I have to put together a presentation, it's about learning, and how the best way to present it to a group, depending on who my audience is. Um, I know for Columbia Southern University, we have a innovations and technology conference coming up in April online. It's virtual. Um, and I put in, a, my topic is about the use of AI and critical thinking. And it's not knocking. I am a very big proponent of AI. Yes, I could knock AI all the way to Sunday, but I think AI, as a researcher, as a writer, as a critical thinker, I've started to use it to help me flood myself with. I have it come up with daily critical thinking quotes. I have it come up with new, uh, I say, topics for my learning, and then, yeah, I'll translate that into, oh my gosh, what I didn't know about Bayesian reasoning. Um, and there's reasons that I have like 4 and 5 articles on that, or there's reason that I talk about intellectualism, because we've lost that with intellectualism. We lose civility. We lose that ability to even have disagreements or agreements. And further, here we are, we're talking about things for over an hour. You have people who can't hold a 5-minute conversation, and they're smart. Um, they'll say they're super smart, and you're just like, let's talk. And yet nobody can. Um, it's so I do what's called vibing. Vibing is taking my go-to is Chat GPT, because I've literally trained it. I don't even have to. I can create a new GPT box and say, my schedule today is I need to write a new chapter on my theoretical. I'm working on another book about a new theory that I came up with on. Um, well, I can tell you really quick to get to that answer. So my theory is precision and curiosity theory. That while we can be curious about topics and information, when we say we're curious about it, we're not looking at any kind of precision in our thinking. Kind of goes back to precision in our thinking within critical thinking, or within critical thought. That when we're curious, we only look at the surface. We don't even try to get scratch the surface. We're just curious about it, and then we run with it. That's what we see full of social media these days, is just that. And I liken that to what we see in the intel community. We see a topic that's really hot, and then we scratch the surface, and then it's gone. That priority or intelligence requirement gets updated by, oh, we think we have enough on that, um, where we don't. So what I do is I finally, I use Chat GPT as that. I've got it trained so I can open a dialogue box and I can just speak to it. I love the dictation part, because I don't want to type everything out. So I use the dictation, and I talk to it. That's my AI kind of companion in a way, that I will have conversations. I need you to go research this topic, that topic. Um, but then I'll do the vibing. I'll go through my Copilot, my Gemini, my Claude, um, and pretty much ask that. Well, I say pretty much. No, I cut and paste the prompt that I put together to see what it comes up with. And it's something that the sycophancy and the hallucinations, that, and so now I'm seeing that as I use the other APIs, that they are very, very closely aligned, with the exception of some wordings. They're not in conflict, direct conflict with one another, um, in their answers. So at least I can stack them, and I can say this came from Claude, this came from Gemini, this came from Chat GPT, as probably. And I do every once in a while use Grok. I will not use DeepSeek. That is highly CCP biased, um, and so to me, it's like it's not worth even using. Um, it's Eastern thought as well. Unfortunately, you think that, well, do I just want Western thought? In a way, but the Eastern, which is Chinese, because it's a Chinese company, and the way that they are using it as their AI for their country is that it's highly censored and it's highly biased. So if you were to ask theoretical questions on philosophy, it's going to come back with a lot more Confucius and Taoism, which is fine if you want to bring those in. But yeah. Yes, because I also ask that contrarian viewpoint in my prompts. I want to try to get, but yes, you can. I don't see it as much with ChatGPT anymore. I see it with Copilot, um, a little bit with Gemini. So Gemini is, of course, Google. Copilot is Microsoft. Um, and those are what Anthropic, I think, backbones. Claude is, I think, an open AI. You do see the omission of information, especially when I start to talk politics and intelligence. Um, you see a lot more on the current administration when I start digging into intelligence and analysis and what's been put out. And I think part of that is also the what ingested, which is mainstream media, which is very left leaning still. That you don't see what the Obama administration did and what the Biden administration, their agencies did or did not do as compared to Trump 1 and 2 administrations. Um, and then I start to see a lot of wash before pre Obama first administration, going back into the Bush, the Clinton, the Bush 41, 43, and then into the Reagan era. Yeah, policy is the only thing that these things will pull up, but you see more news being pulled up in say the ingestion of the last 10 years, and they kind of negate the previous administration. There's that, and that's to me is inherent bias within the GPTs, within the APIs. um, Chat GPT is less to me likely to have omissions, or try to come up with sycophancy of trying to come up with its version of events. Whereas I think Copilot definitely comes up with its version, being a Microsoft, and that I think that there are inherent biases put in deliberate. That's my humble opinion, but that's part of the vibing. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is because I have a business account with Amazon. I had a personal account. I have a personal account too, but I switched over to a business account, and I had a problem with my books being shipped. I think I've told you my both of my books are going to be in the International Spy Museum in their bookstore and on their online bookstore. Yeah, when I went to the I3 summit back in November in DC, a nice young lady, one of their agents in the Spy Museum, uh, in the actual museum, my colleague and I were taking pictures around the intelligence community seal, and I was pointing. I had my fingers up like this, and I'm kind of doing the whole looking at the camera and pointing to the two. It was agency and the bureau, and she's like, "Are you making the peace sign?" And she was just kind of kidding with me? And I said, no, no, no. I said, I was actually, these are two of the agencies I worked with or for over my career. And she's like, oh, those two. And my friend, my colleague goes, oh, no, 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 no. Go around that wheel and tell her which ones that you've worked with for directly, not like you were in a talk with this agency. No, that you literally, your signature line was, and so I was going around and she's just like, oh my gosh. So, anyways, later on, she found us in the exhibits, and she had my friend had said, "Well, he wrote books on intelligence. He teaches intelligence." And she later came back and asked, "Would I give her my contact info for the book people?" Because and the names of the books. And then I did. She came back and said, I put these on the desk. The purchaser, just before Christmas, got a hold of me, and I ordered books. Now, here's to finish the Amazon part of the story: is they needed the books before the end of January, and here we are. We're on the 30th. We got one more day. Um, the bulk of my order through, because they can't order directly from Amazon. They had to purchase through me or the publisher. I'm technically the publisher, so I ordered the books. Well, part of the shipment didn't show up. And I reached out to Amazon online, and it's a chat bot. No real customer service. Yeah. Um, I finally I did it for hours. I mean, I did, because I'm like, these books still hadn't shipped. They had been over a month that they had been saying we're going to be shipped. Um, and I need these like ASAP. And I didn't want to just cancel the order. I wanted to find out, like, have they, where, get a hold of the printer. You know who your printer is for my order. Like, find out, did they even print those off and ship them? For some reason, the 20 something books I ordered for the precision, um, only 16 made it out of the printer. 12 just remained in the queue. Why they weren't all bundled together and shipped as one, I don't know. And that's what I was trying to find out. But I ended up having to go through click after click after click, finally to get to a what they would say is a live. And it was not even about purchases. Um, it was something completely different, that I was like, I just need to get a hold of a live person. And I did outsource to India, which to me is like, okay, language barrier did have a problem. And they, oh no, we promise it's going to be delivered in 24 hours. The next day, still nothing. I reached back out. Luckily, I kind of knew my path. I reached back out, and they said, oh no, it'll be delivered in the next 24 hours. I said, but that's what you said 24 hours ago. Has it even been printed? Well, we don't know. The system is telling us it hasn't, but that it'll print and ship in the next 24 hours. 24 hours goes by. I just canceled the order and redid it. But then it says it's going to be, they're not going to be shipped until the 6th of February. And that was Monday, Tuesday of this week that I went through all this. And I'm like, for the most part, all you get is a chatbot. Um, and it can't really do that much. But I know here in our area in North Texas, we have Amazon has a huge campus, and they just built a whole um, not it's not a warehouse, it's a data warehouse, which is they said for every 1,000 square feet, it's 100 people they have to hire, and that was coming from Amazon. But then when you look at the local, I tried to do it, Amazon jobs, there's nothing out here. And I'm like, no, that's all. It's going to be all AI. It's probably a data center or an AI data center, because yes, I had heard the same thing, that they had entered, and they're going to continue to do that, because they're also Amazon is also developing their own robots for warehouse. Mm, for the cooling. Yep. Mm, yep. Yeah. Yeah. But then they'll just give it to AIs. Yeah. 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 I mean, we're into solar land, and a lot of our solar land in Southern California that we own, um, it's all solar farms. So it's in the Antelope Valley, Lancaster, Palmdale. That whole valley is going to be nothing but battery storage and solar. The solar originally was for a lot more power, because California has mandated in its laws about electric cars, electric buses, so on, and even whole cities, like I believe Lancaster is a green city. All of its city buildings, municipality buildings, are run off of solar power. Um, and more of the projects that we're hearing are for the solar, are not for solar power necessarily, but for AI projects, which yes goes to power, but it's not for power production for electric cars, power production for housing. It's for the data centers. And they said they're just going to need so much more. Texas is the second largest solar producer, or will be. So if you're into, dirt is gold, um, you'd be looking, I would say, look now into California, and I think Arizona has some, um, but that's where you'll make the millions. You can buy land for, 5 acres for 120,000, but in 5 to 7 years, when these solar projects kick off, you'll be able to command 300, 400,000 per acre. And then you can choose whether to sell it outright or leasing it for 20, $40,000 a month for the next 40 or 50 years. So, yeah, I mean, but that's just our, exactly. It is. It is. So, we're going to have to contend with that, as AI grows. So, and again, I mean, I digress. Going back to that AI, the whole thought was that AI to me is making me smarter. I'm using it what I think is in a way that it's not to undermine academia. It's not to undermine the scholarly thought. Um, I mean, it will help me. It does help me in my research. It helps me put together long articles, short articles. I have stacks of projects of where I want to go with things. I just don't haphazardly say, write me an article on tradecraft malpractice. I put thought into it. Going back to Dower's book, I almost look at this as my Bible now. The reason why is, you look at, if you can get a copy of his book, everything that he talks about with critical thinking, um, non-demonstrative arguments and demonstrative arguments. He talks about, the deductive, the language levels have meaning. Everything doesn't matter what page you pull up. He does it into a mathematical equation. I hate mathematics, but guess what? I have actually used those equations. I've plugged them into the AI to help me understand what I still think is he's way up here. It's made sense. So why aren't we teaching that to intelligence analysts so they can sit down and say, here's my problem, here's the premise, and write it almost like a mathematical equation to say then the line which we would say is division is called the therefore, and then your conclusion should be under that. But as long as this is true, these one of these are true, therefore this has to be true. We're not teaching that. I, I literally just in what 5 seconds explained an argument in a mathematical equation that 2 months ago I would say I never thought of. And it would have made a lot of my argumentation as an intelligence analyst, as a conversationalist, so much easier. It's not. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's the complacency I think that we do, that we get into our job and it's the daily grind and it's there is no time that whether you're in a field office, you're at a headquarters, that someone says, you know what, we need you to sit down for an hour and you need to do this and pass this with 100%, and there is no ability to cheat. You either know how to really think and can really pick this apart or you don't. And until you pass that, there is no promotion, there's no merit pay, there's no, I mean, you got to tie it to some incentive, right? That someone has to say until they can. I didn't do it for 20 something years. Not until did I really start diving in myself that I'm like, I really want to know how I could have gotten by all this and then how my analysis suffered. I get where, and then to be even, and probably a topic for another day, but to be criticized or assessed by a senior analyst on your performance when the FBI went to a new performance in 2016 or 2015. Um, it was all based on your what you've written, that you had to have written assessments and blah blah blah. Um, and well, who's critiquing those? Because you and I have probably met senior intel analysts that I'd be like, they only did it because of a popularity contest, and SSA really liked them and moved them up, or another SIA really liked them and moved on, and said, "Hey, here's my good buddy, hire them." Um, because then I saw a lot of capable analysts who could have taught me something got sidelined because, well, they were really good analysts in their job, but they just kept them there because, well, they didn't want to lose that analytical value, which I think they could have done better analytical value or more significant had they been put in a leadership position to push that, hey, go do this. And that's what I feel personally now. Um, yeah, I kind of really hope that the more I email, and I really do appreciate your support and others, that I even said the same thing to Robin. If I could get my foot in the door at ODNI, CIA, FBI, and be able to look at their training and critique it, not as the expert, but as someone I feel like I'm getting more enlightened to that if I'm wrong on saying that these agencies are not teaching analysts, even in follow on, in service trainings, that, well, then you get what you pay for. You're throwing money out the door because we all aren't smart enough. But is there a way that we can continue to be smart, advocate for AI to help to make us smarter, to do a better job doing analysis, especially this day and age with the ingestment of thousands of bits of information per second that, we can't conceivably read the message traffic as though it was in the 1950s or 60s when it was a report or two per day given to an agent or an analyst, at the OSS or at the fledgling agency. That's why we've seen headquarters blow up over the last 20, 30 years. We don't have the field. We expect everything is done by technology. We've cut human. That's that human interaction, only unless we need interrogators, are collecting real human. And then the other human that we're collecting, is it trash? So yeah, I know, digressed onto something else. I know we've talked for an hour and a half. Um, oh, yeah. 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 And I would love to be able to do research, like literally, um, ground truth. Out of all the research I've ever done, and I've even had AI help me. I don't see any external. I would love to be able to give very significant, hard analytic cognitive tests to intelligence analysts of all grades. I wouldn't be surprised. So here's my kind of my null hypothesis. My hypothesis is that analysts are not smart. Okay. We're not dumb, but we're not smart as we think we are. I think that people get to know their area of expertise and they become absolutely brilliant in knowing every fact and figure, say on China or the Indo-China foreign policy and conflicts. Yeah, because they studied it and they lived it. They know every little crack and crevice. But when it comes to analysis, then they're blind because the confirmation bias comes in. They get, as we know, we come in an expert in something and then someone attacks us and we get defensive. Well, that's because now we're not open to, hey, you're right. Maybe I'm not thinking about this in the right way. Um, could I do, or could I put together a team that we would literally, if you want a real hard hitting assessment of, yes, the things that intelligence analysts are supposed to know, like you said, with the analytic cards, how many really would know what ICD 203 says beyond what the little card says? what about ICD 206? Like, shouldn't we know chapter and verse like a lawyer or a judge would on where that law is coming from? But then also, yeah, for how did you come up with that argument? Did you put that argument into a mathematical equation to ensure that we know if your premise is true, then therefore the conclusion is true? There's falsities, there's p's and q's, what Dower goes into, and I think that's something, that's just the argument. And there's a whole bunch of other, like I said, his book, I've now had to read it twice, and I'm still, of what I wish. And yet I hear these analysts on LinkedIn, and you know again, because this is recorded, I'm not saying names or even monikers, but I have to kind of question, like, what you think that you're an analyst, but you're regurgitating stuff. You're not actually putting anything new thought or perspective. Whereas, yes, I can say I can regurgitate stuff, but I'm asking the questions. I'm coming up with recommendations, wanting to further the academic, scholarly, and practitioner or pradamic um, discussion. And no one wants to seem to have it except you and Robin. You guys show up, and yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping. Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you very much. I know I've got to get going. We've gone well over the hour, but yeah, and so am I. I mean, I'm starting to do that. So you have a great weekend. You take care. Bye. Bye, everybody.